Well, Labour will announce today that it will fully nationalise Britain's railways if it comes into power.
The party is calling it the biggest overhaul to our railways in a generation. Kat Neelan is the political editor at Tortoise and joins us now alongside former Transport Minister Norman Baker. What's he wearing today? What colour?
It is yellow.
Okay,
Good morning.
In front of the old ministerial box.
Norman's suits. We like to place a little bet on what colour he's wearing each day. And actually, John in the gallery got it spot on.
Of course he did, because he's seen him down the line. Kat, can I start with you? Thank you so much indeed. Nationalisation, privatisation has always been the big divide, I think, between the Tory party and the Labour Party. This was a policy, nationalisation, that was very much at the forefront of what Jeremy Corbyn wanted to do. Somebody was saying, I think it was Matt Staddon, which I think is quite interesting, is that it's a good moment for Starmer to bring this up because he has the political capital, perhaps, at this moment to do so. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, actually. I think that the debate around nationalisation has shifted considerably since the Corbyn era, when, of course, he was talking about nationalising vast swathes of private industries. I think that there are industries like when we've seen more recently with the water industry, where people are really seriously asking now, is it appropriate for these kinds of utilities or infrastructure like our trains to be in private hands, often when they're owned by foreign owners who are just seeking profits rather than to maintain or improve the services.
And I think, Nick, didn't we? We said it in the last hour, bringing Norman in. Thames Water is almost the barometer. We've done bits on this show where the sewage system is appalling. The bosses are getting fat cap bonuses and we're left with increases on our bill. And I guess that sort of, as Kat quite rightly says, Norman, tends to fuel the argument to put things back in government control. But to flip that, Guy just said, look what the NHS and the civil service is like under government control. So your thoughts, my friend?
It's not sensible to have a monopolistic system delivering an essential public service in private hands without adequate public control. And the water industry in particular is completely out of control, and it's been a complete rip-off for the taxpayer and for the environment. And there's a very strong case for dealing with that. But look, on the railways, this isn't quite the hype that we're hearing from the Labour Party. First of all, the fact is that the railways are already basically nationalised. The Network Rail was nationalised back by the coalition government, of which I was the rail minister back in 2013, 2014. The accountable bodies to look after the railways are all in public hands as well. And so are the rolling stock companies, which Labour don't want to touch. And by the way, where the massive profits are reaching out the industry are on the rolling stock companies. So what Labour is proposing to do is deal with one small aspect of this, actually, which are the people who are actually running the trains on a day-to-day basis. Many of those are effectively controlled by the government already, because after the pandemic, the government has established contracts with these private companies, which basically tell them what to do, and the micromanagement from the Department for Transport. So I don't think very much is going to change in that regard. What will be interesting to see is what Labour are going to do about fares, because they're talking about a best price guarantee. But what does it actually mean? I don't think Rachel Reeves will be giving a lot more money to rail passengers. She's very tight on the finances. And of course, if you're going to get the best price guarantee, that means effectively adopting split ticketing, which is the idea of buying a ticket from A to B and B to C rather than A to C, which gives you a better deal. And it's very complicated. There are 55 million different ticket types in this country. So the detail will be very important on this. But really, there's a lot of hype here. The main difference, Jeremy, is between the system which operates in London Overground, for example, in London, where the TfL, Transport for London, the public body, sets the timetables, sets the fares and so on, but the private company runs the trains. And what Keir Starmer apparently wants to do with this lot, which is to run the trains as well and go back to British Rail.
Interesting. Norman, what would you change then? What would you propose if you were writing their manifesto?
Well, I mean, I think the London model is one that works quite well. And you don't hear complaints about London Overground. London Overground, which is a private company running the trains but directed by Transport for London, has delivered massive increases in numbers of passengers on that particular network. It's the same as London buses, the same principle applies there, and the same principle applies with Andy Burnham's buses in Manchester. So having a state control the essentials, the timetable and the fares, but getting the private sector to come in and add value seems to me to be quite sensible. And also, the private sector then takes some of the risk on the fare box.
Can I just jump in? I'm really interested in your opinion. I want to put that to Kat, because one of the things about the National Health Service is many people will say that should be nationalised again. It's an utter disgrace. What people need to know when the Labour Party speak is that parts of the NHS are already privatised, and he makes a very salient point. I didn't know that. Presumably, it's all well and good to stand up and say, we're going to renationalise it, but parts are already. That's Norman Baker, an ex-Transport Minister. Interesting angle, I thought.
Yes, certainly, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why they are able to do this. We know that Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is scouring every policy with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it doesn't cost too much. And really the only policies that are coming forward are the ones that are either cost neutral or able to be costed. The fact that they are saying that this will not cost the taxpayers any money, obviously that is being contested by the Conservatives. And
what do you think about that? Do you think
well, I mean, I
feasible?
think on the basis of what we've heard from Norman there about how this is sort of tinkering rather than a kind of fundamental change, would suggest that that is the case. And we are starting to hear from some sort of economic experts that it is possible on the basis of what they are talking about. It's a sort of renewal. Every time the contracts come up for renewal, they will be brought in rather than being bought outright, which is what Jeremy Corbyn was proposing back in 2019. So, this could be, I mean, it wouldn't be published, frankly, if Rachel Reeves and her team were not happy with it. So I think that seems to be
she's a power, a force to be reckoned with, isn't she, Rachel Reeves? And the rhetoric from a Labour Chancellor all about costing is a very different game plan, isn't it?
Yeah, and we're seeing already today, this kind of back and forth over the defence spend that the Tories announced on Tuesday, and kind of more detail came out yesterday, where, the Tories are now complaining that Labour would sort of, not protect our country because they're not willing to commit to the 2.5%. The reason for that is because of how much it's actually costing. And again, a bit of smoke and mirrors around the actual amounts and where that money is coming from. The fact that the Conservatives are saying they're able to get this from curbing civil service numbers. I think there are some eyebrows being raised about whether that's actually something kind of
sounds
make
like
the
a
maths
headline,
work.
but there are many people that would criticise the civil service.
Should we move on to a different transport story now? The boss of Ryanair has defiantly announced that he would happily fly asylum seekers to Rwanda under Rishi Sunak's deportation plans. But it wasn't a case, was it, Norman, of him saying that take whatever flight you like? There were some caveats to it. He said they would be able to potentially use the winter schedule if they had spare aircraft sitting around. That doesn't bode well for Rishi Sunak.
But he wanted to go in July. Got to wait to November. Wow.
There's a suggestion that by the time you have the difficulty of rounding up people, and they're all going to go underground, by the way, as soon as this plan becomes definite, there will probably be more than 20 or 30 people on each flight. So it's going to be very expensive for the taxpayer to fund these flights, even if they ever take off. And of course, the reality is the number of people who are flown out, even if the planes are full, is going to be a tiny proportion of those who are arriving in this country by boat, and an even smaller proportion of those who are arriving legally.
Can I pick up on something you just said?
High.
Norman, can I pick up on something? Because I'm going to say this every day because I think it's so important. We found this out on Monday when this great Rwanda plan was raised. We've all got our opinions about it. That Sunak said, I'm going to handpick 200 of the first... And I'm all for dealing with this problem. I just think we need to deal with 170,000 backlog. You made a point. I want to explain it. You said they'll all go underground. You have to send an email to these potential illegal migrants, don't know, some could be refugees, saying, could you please come to the detention centre? And only when you've come to the detention centre can we send you potentially with Ryanair and Michael O'Leary, who likes to quit, off to Rwanda. They're not going to answer their emails, are they? I've never heard anything so ludicrous in my life.
No, and it reminds me of back in my constituency, in my days as an MP, there was a notice at Newhaven Port in my constituency, which said, when you arrive, if you've arrived without a proper authority or you have goods to declare, please pick up the telephone and ring a number. Well, nobody ever did, except one person did, and then was told there was nobody at Newhaven to deal with him. And to get on the train, here's a free train ticket, get off at East Croydon and go to Luna House. They never got off at East Croydon, very surprisingly.
Amazing.
Kat, what do you make of this announcement by Michael O'Leary?
Well, I'll be interested to see what his shareholders make of it, because on the one hand, it could be quite lucrative, but on the other hand, I mean, there is a big reason why most commercial airlines aren't touching it with a barge pole.
I've met Michael O'Leary, and trust me, he don't give a damn about his reputation. He cares about making money, mate, seriously.
The UN has been warning that any airline that touches this could be in breach of international law, and that might make some people think twice about whether or not to take it. And Michael O'Leary might be saying he's willing to consider it, but when push comes to shove, he might not actually be able to.
And to be fair, he's not said he would happily do it. He said we would happily quote for it for the business.
Yes.
And I think there's a very big difference.
Yeah.
Can we just ask you both very quickly? Nick's been asking this all morning. The Deputy Prime Minister's question time yesterday descended into, well, just barbed criticism, including Sunak being described as a pint-sized loser. I'm not really interested in which side. I just think, I'd love to know what you both think quickly, most people who are turned off by our politicians, by the scandals and all the embarrassment, will just look at that and go, is that really what it's become?
Maybe. I mean, I saw a lot of headlines pick up on that story, and as someone that is actually shorter than Rishi Sunak, I have to say I did laugh at it. You know, I think that is kind of what PMQs has become. You don't really often get substantial policy debate, you just get a back and forth. And clearly, Angela Rayner was braced for a lot of
came out to attack
vitriol
on
over the housing
attack,
issue.
right, yeah.
Exactly. So she had been prepping for that all week. You know, Oliver Dowden is not necessarily...
He's a bit dowdy, isn't he?
Well, he clearly enjoys his time at the dispatch box. He looked like he was having a whale of a time, although I don't think his lines landed in quite the way that he was hoping for. And actually, I think Rishi Sunak probably had more of a successful PMQs the previous week.
We've actually, if you don't mind, we can actually play a little bit. Listen to this and watch this, my friends, quickly.
I know the party opposite is desperate to talk about my living arrangements. But the public want to know what this government is going to do about theirs.
Any more of these, and she'll be claiming it as her principal residence.
Maybe it's the 3 a.m. calls from the bad men that have been keeping him up at night. Has he finally realised that when he stabbed Boris Johnson in the back to get his mate into number 10, he was ditching their biggest election winner for a pint-sized loser?
I actually do think, just on that, the fact that she kind of twinned it with the removal of Boris Johnson, I think, you know, that's interesting on two levels. Firstly, it's an acknowledgement from Labour that Boris Johnson was an electoral asset. And, you know, we kind of do hear from a lot of Conservatives that they have lost their biggest electoral asset, and that Rishi Sunak is not a campaigning person, is not someone that kind of works well with the people. So there was a kind of solid point being made that kind of gets lost in the rhetoric.
Norman, what do you make of that?
Sorry.
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit of knockabout, wasn't it? A bit of fun. But I mean, I think people looking at this will enjoy it as a comedy. It's not really serious politics. And it's, you know, gratuitous insults really don't get us very far.
But do you understand my theory? Tell me if I'm wrong, both of you. But one of my big fears, I mean, I would always vote, but I think we can sit here in this bubble that we are doing this show and talking about politics. I think your average Joe in the country will go, is that it? Is that the best? I can't afford this. I can't get an appointment. I think the world's on the edge of whatever, and they're just calling each other names and smirking and laughing. Are these people really the people I want representing me? And I think that's going to happen, Norma, more and more.
Yes, I think it is. And I think there's been a long disengagement with politicians. It goes back to the betrayal of the Iraq War, when we were told lies by Tony Blair from the dispatch box. It goes through the MP's expenses. It goes through Brexit, which was either a disaster according to your point of view or not delivered properly if you voted for it. Either way, people have given up faith in politicians to a large degree. And that's a real problem, because we need to have people engaged in politics across the country to make sure democracy works properly.
Kat?
Yeah, there is actually some interesting polling and surveys that show that the more you kind of use attack lines, you know, kind of one side accusing the other of being too woke or, you know, whatever it is, actually turns people off and has a sort of drop-off effect on engagement in politics. So, and we know that the election campaign is going to be quite a nasty one. So I wouldn't be surprised if an already apathetic electorate is kind of further put off.
How does that compare to when newspapers or people in the media go along attack lines?
I think it probably has the same effect. I think in general, it ends up in people feeling a plague on both your houses. I don't want to be involved, so I'll just sit this one out.
Interesting.
I mean, it's interesting if you look at Angela Rayner as a character.
Sure.
You know, talking about Boris Johnson, there is something at least about her the two protagonists, the current Prime Minister and the would-be Prime Minister, have about as much personality as those glasses. And I'm not being rude. At least she's fiery. Yeah. And I thought the point you made, the acknowledgement of Boris, who will be back, by the way, I think that acknowledgement was really interesting because he was sort of somebody that people would, you'd love or you'd hate. Like a Trump person, she's also somebody who has something about her.
Yeah, she's charismatic, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Tories are going so hard for her, because they know that she is a kind of important part to the sort of Labour team.
I'm still fascinated as to why Sunak Starmer doesn't defend her. I think I know why, but I think it suits him.
Yeah, it's sort of distancing himself. You know, he doesn't want to kind of get involved should she turn out to have committed an offence. It's plausible deniability.
Well, thank you so much, Kat Neelan from Tortoise, and former Transport Minister in the
Thanks,
yellow shirt, Norman Baker.
Yellow.